Hello, and welcome back to Trizty Bedtime Stories. We have returned for the second chapter of the Hobbit book. For a chance to get you comfortable and ready to listen, you'll be given 30 seconds, starting now. Are you comfortable? Do you have a drink? Oh, the cozy covers, a friend, or a teddy? If so, make yourself extra comfortable and enjoy. Up jumped Bilbo, and putting on his dressing gown, went into the dining room. There he saw nobody, but all the signs of a large and hurried breakfast. There was a fearful mess in the room, and piles of unwashed crocks in the kitchen. Nearly every pot and pan he possessed seemed to be abused. The washing up was so dismally real that Bilbo was forced to believe that part of the night before had been part of his bad dreams, as he had rather hoped. Indeed, he was really relieved, after all, to think that they had all gone without him. And you, gone without him, and without bothering to wake him up, but with never a thank you, he thought, and yet in a way he could not help feeling just a trifle disappointed. The feeling surprised him. "Don't be a fool, Mr. Baggins," Bilbo said. "Don't be a fool, Bilbo Baggins," he said to himself, "thinking of dragons and all that outlandish nonsense at your age." So he put on an apron, lit fires, boiled water, and washed up. Then he had a nice little breakfast in the kitchen before turning out the dining room. By that time the sun was shining and the front door was open, letting in a warm spring breeze. Bilbo began to whistle loudly and forgot about the night before. The fact he was just sitting down to a nice little second breakfast in the dining room by the open window when in walked Gandalf. "My dear fellow," said he, "wherever are you going to come? What about at the early start? And here you are having breakfast, or whatever you call it, at 10:30. They left you and the message, because they could not wait." "What message?" said Mr. Baggins, all in a fluster. "Great elephants," said Gandalf, "you are not all yourself this morning. You have never trusted this mantelpiece." "What's that got to do with it? I've had enough with washing up for 14. "If you had trusted the mantelpiece, you would have found this just under the clock," said Gandalf, handing Bilbo a note, written, of course, in his own notice paper. This is what he did. This is what he read. "Thorn and Company to Burglar Bilbo, greeting. For your hospitality, our sincerest thanks, and for your offer of professional assistance, our greatest acceptance. Terms, cash on delivery, up to and not exceeding 1/14 of total profits, if any. All travel expenses guaranteed in any event. Funeral expenses to be defrayed by us or our representatives. If occasion arises and the matter is not otherwise arranged for, thinking it unnecessary to disturb your estimated repose, we are processed in advance to make requestionary reputations, and shall await a respected person at the Green Dragon Inn, Bywater, at 11 a.m. sharp, trusting that you'll be punctual. We have your honour to remain. Yours deeply, Thorn and Company." That leaves you 10 minutes. You'll have to run," said Gandalf. "But," said Bilbo. "No time for but," said the wizard. "But," said Bilbo, "no time for that either. Off you go." To the end of his days, Bilbo could never remember how he found himself outside, without a hat, a walking stick, or any money, or anything like that he usually took when he went out, leaving for his second breakfast half finished. Leaving his second breakfast half finished and quite unwashed up, pushing his keys into Gandalf's hands and running as fast as furry feet could carry him, down the lane, past the green mill, across the water, and then off for a mile or more. Very puffed he was, when he got to Bywater just at the stroke of 11, and found he had come without a pocket handkerchief. "Bravo!" said Balin, who was standing at the inn door looking just out for him. Just then all the others came round the corner of the river from the village. They were on ponies, and each pony was slung about all the kinds of baggages, packages, parcels, and paraphernalia. There was a very small pony, apparently for Bilbo. "Up you get, and off you go," said Thorin. "I'm awfully sorry," said Bilbo, "but I have to come without my hat, and I've left my pocket handkerchief behind, and I haven't got any money. I didn't get your note till around 10:45 to be precise." "Don't be precise," said Dwalin, "and don't worry. You will have to manage without pocket handkerchiefs and a good many other things before you get into the journey's end. As for a hat, I got a spare hood and cloak in my luggage." That's how they all came to start, jogging off from the inn one fine morning just before May on laden ponies, and Bilbo was wearing a dark green hood, a little weather-stained, and a dark green cloak borrowed from Dwalin. They were too large for him, and he looked rather comic, but his father, Bungo, would have thought of him, I don't think. His only comfort was he couldn't be mistaken for a dwarf, as he had no beard. They had not been riding very long when Gandalf came, very splendid on a white horse. He had brought a lot of pocket handkerchiefs, and Bilbo's pipe and tobacco. So after that the party went along very merrily, and they told stories or sang songs as they rode forward all day, except of course when they stopped for meals. These didn't come quite as often as Bilbo would have liked them, but still he began to feel that adventures were not so bad after all. At first they had passed through Hobbit lands, a wide, respectable country inhabited by decent folk, with good roads, an inn or two, and now and then a dwarf or a farmer ambling by one business. Then they came to lands where people spoke strangely, and sang songs Bilbo had never heard before. Now they had gone on far into the lone lands, where there were no people left, no inns, and roads grew steadily worse. Not far ahead were dreary hills, rising higher and higher, dark with trees. Some of them were old castles with an evil look, as if they had been built by wicked people. Everything seemed gloomy, for the weather that day had taken a nasty turn. Mostly it had been so good as May can be, even in merry tales, but now it was cold and wet. In the lone lanes they had been obliged to camp when they could, but at least it had been dry. "To think it to be June," grumbled Bilbo, as he splashed along behind the others in a very muddy track. It was after tea time. It was pouring with rain, and had been all day. His hood was dripping into his eyes. His cloak was full of water. His pony was tired and stumbled on stones. The others were too grumpy to talk, and I'm sure the rain was got into the dry clothes and into the food bags, thought Bilbo. Bothering, burglaring, everything to do with it. I wish I was just at home in my nice hole by the fire, with the kettle just beginning to sing. It was not the last time that he wished for that. Still the dwarf jogged on, never turning round or taking any notice into the Hobbit. Somewhere behind the grey clouds the sun must have gone down, for it began to get dark as they went down into the deep valley with the river at the bottom. Wind got up, and willows along its banks bent and sighed. Fortunately the road went over an ancient stone bridge, for the river, swollen with the rains, came rushing down from the hills and mountains in the north. It was nearly night when they had crossed over. The wind broke up the grey clouds, and a wandering moon appeared beyond the hills, between the flying rags. When they stopped, and Thorin muttered something about supper. "And where shall we get a dry patch to sleep on?" Not until they did notice Gandalf was missing. So far he had come all the way with them, never saying if he was the adventurer or merely keeping them company for a while. He had eaten most, talked most, and laughed most, but now he simply was not there at all. "Just when a wizard would have been most useful too," groaned Dorian Norrie, who shared the Hobbit's view about regular meals plenty and often. They decided in the end that they would have to camp where they were. They moved to a clump of trees, and though it was drier under them, the wind shook and the rain all over the leaves, and the drip was most annoying. Also, the mischief seemed to have gotten into the fire. Dwarfs can make a fire almost anywhere after anything, wind or no wind, but they could not do it that night. Not often Oin and Gloin, who were especially good at it. Then one of the ponies took fright at nothing and bolted. He got into the river before they could catch him, and before they could get him again, Killy and Philly were nearly drowned, and all the baggage that he carried was washed away off him. Of course it was mostly food, and there was mighty little left for supper and less for breakfast. They were all sat glum and wet and muttering while Oin and Glen went on trying to light the fire, and quarrelling about it. Bilbo was sadly reflecting that adventures were not all pony rides in May sunshine, when Balin, who was always their lookout man, said, "There's a light over there." There was a hill some way off, the trees on it, pretty thick in parts. Out of the dark mass of the trees they could now see a light shining, a reddish, comfortable-looking light, as it might be a fire or torches twinkling. When they had looked at it for some while, they fell to an arguing. Some said no, and some said yes. Some said they couldn't but go but see. Anything was better than a little supper, less breakfast, and wet clothes all at night. Others said, "These parts are known too well, and known well, and are near to the mountains. Travellers seldom come this way now. The old maps are no use. Things have changed for worse, and the road is unguarded. They have seldom even heard of the king round here, and less inquisitive are as you go along, the less trouble you are likely to find." Some said, "After all, there are 14 of us." Others said, "Where was Gandalf got to?" This remark was repeated by everybody. Then the rain began to pour down worse than ever, and Oin and Gloin began to fight. "That settled it. After all, we've got the burglar with us," they said, and so they made off leading their ponies, with all due and proper caution, in the direction of the light. They came to the hill and were soon in the wood. Up the hill they went, but there was no proper path to be seen, such as might lead to a house or a farm, and do what they could make a deal of rustling and crackling and creaking, and a good deal of grumbling and darting, as they went through the tree in the pitch black. Suddenly the red light shone out very bright through the tree trunks not far ahead. "Now it is the burglar's turn," they said, meaning Bilbo. "You must go and find out what that light is all about, and what it is for, and if all is perfectly safe and canny," said Thorin to the Hobbit. "Now scuffle off and come back quick. If all is well, if not, come back if you can. If you can't, hoot twice like a barn owl and once like a screech owl, and we will do what we can." Off Bilbo had to go, before he could explain that he could not hoot even once like any kind of owl, more like fly like a bat. But at any rate, hobbits can move quietly in the woods, absolutely quietly. I take a pride in it. And Bilbo had sniffled more than once in what he called all the dwarvish racket as they went along, though I don't suppose you or I would have noticed anything at all on a windy night, not if the whole cavalcade had passed 2 feet off. As for Bilbo, walking primarily towards the red light, I don't suppose even a weasel would have stirred a whisker at it. So naturally, he got right up to the fire, for fire it was, without disturbing anyone, and this is what he saw. 3 very large persons sitting around a very large fire of beech logs. They were toasting mutton on long spirits of wood, and licking the gravy off their fingers. There was a fine tooth some sell, and there was a barrel of good drink at hand, and they were drinking out of jugs. But they were trolls, obviously trolls. Even Bilbo, in spite of his sheltered life, could see that from the great heavy faces on them, and their size, and the shape of their legs, not to mention their language, which was not drawing-room fashion at all. At all. "Mutton yesterday, mutton today, and blum if I don't look like mutton again tomorrow," said one of the trolls. "Never a blinking bit of man-flesh to have had for long enough," said a second. "What they call him, William, was a-thinking of a brighter vessel to pass of all. Beats me, and the drinking running short, what's more," he said, jogging along the elbow of William, who was taking a pull at his jug. William choked. "Shut your mouth," he said as soon as he could. "You can't expect folk to stop you for every just to be out at you. And Bert, you're at a village and half between a year since we come down from the mountains. How much more do you want? And time's been out our way. When you ever said thank you, Bill, for a nice bit of fatty old valley mountain? Look what this is us." He took a big bite off a sheep's leg he was roasting, and wiped his lips with his sleeve. Yes, I am afraid trolls do behave like that. Not even those with only 1 head each. After hearing all this, Bilbo ought to have done something at once. Either he should have gone back quietly and warned his friends that there was 3 fair-sized trolls at hand in a nasty mood, quite likely to try roasted dwarf, or even pony, for a change, or else he had done for a bit of a good luck burgling. A really first-class lunch-day burglar would at this point have picked the troll's pockets. It is nearly always worthwhile if you can manage it. Pinched. The very mutton off the spits, prolonged the beer, and walked off without their noticing him. Others more practically, but with less professional pride, would perhaps have stuck a dagger into each of them before they observed it. Then the night could have been spent cheerily. Bilbo knew it. He had a read of a good many things he had never seen or done. He was very much alarmed, as well as disgusted. He wished himself 100 miles away, and yet somehow he could not go straight back to Thorin and company empty-handed. So he stood and hesitated in the shadows. Of the various burglaries proceedings he had heard of, picking the troll's pockets seemed the least difficult. So at least he crept behind a tree, just behind William. Bert and Tom went off to the barrel. William was having another drink. Then Bilbo plucked up courage and put his little hand in William's enormous pocket. There was a purse in it, as big as a bag to Bilbo. Ha! Thought he, warmed to his new work, lifted carefully out. This is the beginning. It was. Trolls' purses are the mischief, and this was no exception. "Who are you?" it squeaked, as it left the pocket, and William turned round at once and grabbed Bilbo by the neck before he could duck behind the tree.
"Blimey, Bert! Look at what I've cooked up," said William.
"What is it?" said the others, coming up.
"Lummy if I knows. What are ye?"
Bilbo Baggins, a Hobbit, said poor Bilbo, shaking all over and wondering how to make owl noises before they throated him.
"A burrow of what about?"
said they, a bit startled. Trolls are slow in the uptake, and mighty suspicious about anything new to them.
"What's a burrow got to do with my pocket, anyways?"
said William.
"And can ye cook him?"
said Tom.
"Yer can try,"
said Bert, picking up a skewer.
"He wouldn't make about a mouthful," said William,
who had already had a fine supper.
"Not when he was skinned and boned. Perhaps there are more like him round about, and we might make a pie," said Bert. "Here you are, there are more of you snorting and sneaking in these woods, you nasty little rabbit,"
said he, looking at the Hobbit's furry feet, and he picked him up by the toes and shook him. "Yes, lots," said Bilbo, before he remembered to not give his friends away. "None at all, no one," he said immediately afterwards.
"What do you mean?" said
Bert, holding him right up by the hair this time. "What I say," said Bilbo, gasping, "and please don't cook me, kind sirs. I am a good cook myself, and cook better than I cook. If you see what I mean, I'll cook beautifully for you. A perfectly beautiful breakfast for you, if only you won't have me for supper."
"Poor little blighter,"
said William. He had already had as much supper as he could hold. Also, he had lots of beer.
"Poor little blighter, let him go. Not till he says what he means by lots and none at all," said Bert. "I don't want to have me throat cut in my sleep. Hold his toes in the fire till he talks."
"I won't have it," said William. "I caught him anyway."
"You're a fat fool, William," said Bert. "As I said before, after this murthering,
"You're a lout."
"I won't take you from you, Bill Huggins,"
said Bert, and puts his fist in Bill William's eye. There was a gorgeous row. Bilbo had just enough wits left when Bert dropped him on the ground to scramble out of the way of their feet before they were fighting like dogs, and calling one another all sorts of perfectly true and impeccable names, in very loud voices. Soon then they were locked in others' arms and rolling nearly into the fire, kicking and tumbling, while Tom whacked at them both with a branch to bring them to their senses, and that of course only made them madder than ever. That would have been in the time for Bilbo to have left, but his poor little feet had been very squashed in Bert's big paw, and he had no breath in his body, and his head was going round, so there he lay for a while panting, just outside the circle of the firelight. Right in the middle of the fight came Balin. The dwarfs had heard noises from a distance, and after waiting for some time for Bilbo to come back, or to hoot like an owl, they started off by one to creep towards the light as quietly as one off could do. No sooner did Tom see Balin come into the light than he gave an awful howl. Trolls simply detest the very sight of dwarfs, uncooked. Bert and Bill stopped fighting immediately. And, "A sack! Tom, quick!" they said, before Balin, who was wondering where on all the commotion Bilbo was, knew what was happening. A sack was over his head, and he was down.
There's more to come yet, said Tom, or I might have mistook. Lots of not at all, is it? Said he. No butter bobbits, but lots of here dwarfs. That's about the shape of him. I reckon you're right, said Bert. I'd best get out of the light.
And so they did. With sacks in their hands, and they used for carrying off mutton and other plunder, they waited in the shadows, as each dwarf came up and looked at the fire, and the spilled jugs, and the gnawed mutton in surprise. Pop! Went a nasty smell sack over his head, and when he was down, soon Dwalin lay by Balin, and Chili and Killy together, and Dory and Nori, and Orion in the whole heap, and Owen and Gloin, and Biff and Buffer, and Bummer piled uncomfortably near the fire.
That'll teach him,
said Tom, for Biffer and Bummer had given a lot of trouble, and fought like mad, as dwarfs were when concerned. Thorin came last, and he was not caught unaware. He came expecting mischief, and didn't need to see his friend's legs sticking out of sacks to tell him things were not well at all. He stood outside in the shadows some way off, and said, "What's all this trouble? Who has been knocking my people out?" "It's trolls," said Bilbo from a tree. They had forgotten all about him. "They're hiding in the bushes with sacks," said he.
"Oh, are they?"
said Thorin. He jumped forward to the fire before they could leap on him. He caught up a big branch all of the fire at the end, and Bert got the end of it in his eye before he could step aside. That put him out of the battle for a bit. Bilbo did his best. He caught a hold of Tom's leg as well as he could. It was as thick as his young tree trunk, but he was sent spinning up into the top of the sun bushes when Tom kicked the sparks up in Thorin's face. Tom got the branch in his teeth for that, and lost one of the front ones. It made him howl, I can tell you. But just at that moment, William came up behind and popped a sack right over Thorin's head and down to his toes. And so the fight ended. A nice pickle they were all in now, all neatly tied up in sacks, with 3 angry trolls, and 2 with burns and bashes to remember, sitting by them, arguing whether they should roast them slowly, or mince them fine and boil them, or just sit on them one by one and squash them into jelly. And Bilbo up in a bush, with his clothes and skin torn, not daring to move for they fear should hear him. It was just then that Gandalf came back, but no one saw him. The trolls had just decided to roast the dwarfs now and eat them later. That was Bert's idea, and after a lot of argument they had all agreed to it.
"No good roasting him now. He'll take all night,"
said a voice. Bert thought it was William's.
"Don't start the argument all over again, Bill," he said, "or it will take all night." "Who's arguing?" said William, who thought it was Bert that he had spoken. "You are," said Bert. "You're a liar," said William, and so the argument began all over again. In the end they decided to mince them fine and boil them. So they got a great black pot, and they took out their knives. "No good boiling 'em. We can't get no water. It's a long way to the well and all," said a voice. Bert and William thought it was Tom's. "Shut up," said they. "We'll never have it done, and you could fetch the water yourself if you said any more." "Shut up yourself," said Tom, who thought it was William's voice. "Who's arguing but you?" "Who's arguing but you? I'd like to know." "You're a booby," said William. "Booby yourself," said Tom. And so the argument began all over again, and went on hotter than ever, until at last they decided to sit on the sacks one by one and squash them, and boil them next time. "Who shall we sit on first?" said the voice. "Better sit on the last fellow first," said Bert, whose eye had been damaged by Thorin. He thought Tom was talking. "Don't talk to yourself," said Tom, "but if you wants to sit on the last one, sits on him. Which is he?" "The one with the yellow stockings," said Bert. "Nonsense! The one with the grey stockings," said a voice like William's. "I made sure it was yellow," said Bert. "Yellow it was," said William. "Then what did you say it was grey for?" said Bert. "I never did. Tom said it." "That I never did," said Tom. "It was you." "Not 2-1, so shut your mouth," said Bert. "Who are you talking to?" said William. "Now stop it," said Tom and Bert together. "The night's getting on, and dawn comes early. Let's get on with it." "Dawn take you all, and be stoned to you," said a voice that sounded like William's, but it wasn't, for just at that moment the light came over the hill, and there was a mighty twitter in the branches. William never spoke, for he stood turned to stone as he stopped, and Bert and Tom were stuck like rocks as they looked at him, and they all stand to this day, all alone, unless the birds perch on them for trolls, and you probably know, must be underground before dawn, or they go back to the stuff of the mountains they are made of, and never move again.
That is what will happen to Bert and Tom and William. Excellent, said Gandalf as he stepped from behind a tree and helped Bilbo to climb down off the thorn bush. Then Bilbo understood. It was the wizard's voice that had kept the trolls bickering and quarrelling, until the night came and made an end of them. The next thing was to untie the sacks and let out the dwarfs. They were nearly suffocated, and very annoyed. They had not howled and enjoyed lying there listening to the trolls making plans for roasting them, squashing them, and mincing them. They had to hear Bilbo's account of what had happened to him twice over before they were satisfied.
Silly time to go practising pinching and picket-pocketing, said Bomber, when what we wanted was fire and food.
And that's just what you wouldn't have wanted, though those fellows without a struggle in any case, said Gandalf. Anyhow, you and you're wasting time now. Don't you realize that the trolls must have a cave or a hole dug in somewhere near to hide from the sun in? We must look into it. They searched about, and soon found the marks of trolls' stony boots going away through the trees. They followed the tracks uphill, until hidden by bushes they came on a big door of stone leading to a cave. But they could not open it, not though they all pushed with Gandalf tried various incantations.
Would this be any good? Asked Bilbo, when they were getting tired and angry. I found it on the ground where the trolls had fight. He held out a largish key, though no doubt William had thought it was very small and secret. It wasn't. It must have fallen out of his pocket, very luckily, before he was turned to stone.
Why on earth didn't you mention it before? They cried. Gandalf grabbed it and fitted it into the keyhole. Then the stone door swung back with one big push, and they all went inside. There were bones on the floor, and a nasty smell was in the air, but there was a good deal of food jumbled carelessly on shelves and on the ground, among an untidy litter of plunder, of all sorts, from brass buttons to pots full of gold coins standing in a corner. There were lots of clothes, too, belonging to victims, and among them were several swords of various makes, shapes, and sizes. Two caught their eyes particularly because of their beautiful scabbards and jeweled hilts. Gandalf and Thorin each took one of these, and Bilbo took a tiny knife in a leather sheath. It would have made only a tiny pocket knife for a troll, but it was as good as the short sword for the Hobbit.
These look like good blades, said the wizard,
half drawing them and looking at them curiously.
They're not made by any troll, nor by any smith among men in these parts and days.
But when we can read the runes on them, we shall know more about them.
Let's get out of this horrible smell, said Philly.
So they carried out the pots and coins and such food as they were untouched and looked fit to eat. Also 1 barrel of ale which was still full. By that time they felt like breakfast, and being very hungry they did not turn their noses up at what they had got from the trolls' ladder. Their own provisions were near scanty. Now they had bread and cheese, and plenty of ale, and bacon to toast in the embers of the fire. After that they slept, for their night had been disrupted, and they did nothing more until the afternoon. Then they brought up their ponies, and carried away the pots of gold, and buried them very secretly not far from the track of river, pushing a great many spells over them, just in case they ever had the chance to come back and recover them. When that was done, they all mounted up once more, and jogged along again on the path towards the east.
Where'd you go, if I may ask?
Said Thorin to Gandalf as they rode along.
To look ahead, said he.
And what brought you back in the nick of time?
Looking behind,
said he.
Exactly,
said Thorin. But could you be more plain?
I went on to spy out on our road. It will soon become dangerous and difficult. Also, I was anxious about replenishing our small stock of provisions. I had not gone very far, however, when I met a couple of friends of mine from Rivendell.
Where's that? Asked Bilbo.
Don't interrupt, said Gandalf.
You will get there in a few days now, if we're lucky, and find out all about it, as I was days now, if we're lucky.
Saying I met 2 of Elrond's people. They were hurrying along for fear of the trolls. It was they who told me that the 3 of them had come down from the mountains and settled in the woods, not far from the road. They had frightened everyone away from the district, and they waylaid strangers.
I immediately had a feeling about them when I was wanted back. Looking behind, I saw a fire in the distance and made for it. So now you know. Please be more careful next time, or you shall never get anywhere.
Thank you,
said Thorin.